The morning mist clung to the hills of Thessaly like a shroud. Through that heavy fog, two ancient superpowers edged toward one of the most decisive confrontations in classical history. One had ruled the Greek world with the might of its phalanx formation. The other, an upstart republic, had mastered a new way of war. When their armies met at Cynoscephalae, the world would watch the Macedonian dream shatter, and Rome would rise to dominate the ancient world. This is the story of how a single battle ended centuries of Macedonian power, forever. The conflict didn't start at Cynoscephalae. It began years earlier with the death of a king. In 204 BC, Ptolemy IV of Egypt died, leaving the throne to his 6-year-old son, Ptolemy V. The eastern Mediterranean smelled of opportunity. Two predators closed in, Philip V of Macedon and Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. The two monarchs struck an agreement, divide up the Ptolemaic Empire between them. With this pact, they sought to redraw the balance of power in the Hellenistic world. But their ambitions didn't go unchallenged. Pergamon and Rhodes, regional powers with their own stakes in the region, sided with Egypt. Philip struck first, unleashing a campaign across Asia Minor and the Aegean. In 201 BC, he besieged Pergamon and smashed the Rhodian fleet at Lade. His momentum seemed unstoppable, and that's when Rome decided to intervene. The Roman Senate, ever wary of unchecked power in the east, saw Philip's expansion as a direct threat. In 200 BC, they declared war, the Second Macedonian War, and sent a Roman army under Publius Sulpicius Galba across the Adriatic. But it wasn't a straightforward march to victory. The war dragged on, filled with skirmishes and shifting alliances. Rome's early campaigns met with limited success. However, its presence stirred old enemies of Macedon. The Aetolian League, long resentful of Philip's dominance in Greece, joined the Roman cause. The tide began to shift. In 198 BC, a new Roman commander arrived, Titus Quinctius Flamininus. Young, ambitious, and fluent in Greek, he didn't just bring legions, he brought diplomacy. He charmed the Greeks with promises of freedom and liberty. But his real aim was domination through strategy. And the time for talk was ending. By 197 BC, Philip was cornered. He had pushed into central Greece, trying to hold onto what influence he had left. But Flamininus was coming for him. The two armies danced through Thessaly, shadowing each other across rugged terrain. They met near Pherai but hesitated. Neither wanted to risk a decisive engagement on ground that favored the other. Philip withdrew, heading west toward Scotussa, a town where he could resupply and, more importantly, find open ground for his prized phalanx. But Flamininus anticipated this move. He led his forces along a different path, hoping to reach the area first and deny Philip the terrain he needed. For 2 days, the armies marched in parallel, unaware they were separated only by a narrow chain of hills, the Cynoscephalae, or Dog's Heads, named for the twin peaks that crown the ridge. The stage was set for a clash neither side fully expected. As dawn broke, the hills were blanketed in thick fog. Philip's camp stirred near Malambium. He hesitated, unsure whether to continue marching. Not expecting combat, he made a crucial error. He sent half his troops out to forage. Meanwhile, he dispatched a small unit of cavalry and light infantry to scout the hills ahead. On the other side of those hills, Flamininus had done the same, sending 1,000 light infantry and some cavalry to probe the terrain. And then, in the heart of the fog, they collided. A sudden, vicious skirmish erupted. Caught off guard and outnumbered, the Romans sent urgent word back to Flamininus. Reinforcements were dispatched, Aetolian cavalry and more infantry. The balance shifted. Now it was the Macedonians being pushed back toward the summit. Philip, upon hearing the clash, realized the danger. He sent more mercenaries and cavalry to reinforce his men on the hill. The tide turned again. The Macedonian force surged down the slope, driving the Romans back toward their camp. But then, the fog began to lift. With visibility returning, Philip saw an opportunity. Emboldened by his minor victory on the ridge, he assembled half of his elite phalanx, 16-foot sarissas gleaming in the morning light, and began the slow, deliberate march up the hill. The rest of his phalanx was still out gathering supplies. Flamininus, now fully aware of Philip's location, acted quickly. He deployed his army at the base of the hill. His 22,000 heavy infantry formed the Roman manipular formation. War elephants were stationed on the right. but his most critical move, holding his right flank in reserve, waiting to see when and where the rest of the Macedonians would arrive. He led the left flank personally up the slope. The Roman infantry met the Macedonians head-on. This was no longer a skirmish, it was war. At first, the Romans pushed the Macedonians back, but Philip had now reached the summit with half of his phalanx. He deployed them in line, added the retreating troops to his right, and ordered a full advance downhill. Now, the Roman left faltered. The weight and momentum of the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, sarissas bristling like a wall of spears, began to drive the legions back. And just then, the rest of the Macedonian phalanx appeared at the crest of the hill. But they were out of formation, vulnerable, exposed. Flamininus didn't hesitate. He unleashed his right flank, the troops he had held in reserve. They surged forward, slamming into the Macedonian left before it could fully deploy. The results were devastating. The hastily arranged Macedonian units were no match for the organized Roman charge. They broke. Panic swept through the Macedonian rear. And then, a Roman tribune saw it. The exposed rear of Philip's right flank, still pressing the Roman line, unaware of the collapse behind them. Seizing the moment, the tribune led his men in a flanking maneuver. They crashed into the rear of the phalanx. Chaos. The phalanx, strong only when facing forward, disintegrated. Macedonian soldiers, now surrounded, dropped their sarissas and fled. The line collapsed. The field was lost. Philip, watching from a nearby height, saw his army break. 8,000 Macedonians were dead, 5,000 captured, the rest scattered. The phalanx, the symbol of Macedonian power since the days of Philip II and Alexander the Great, had been broken by Rome's flexibility and speed. The Battle of Cynoscephalae didn't just end a war. It ended an era. Philip V was forced to surrender his fleet, renounce all territories in Greece, Thrace, and Asia Minor, and send his own son to Rome as a hostage. Macedon would never again challenge Roman supremacy. But more than that, it proved something crucial, that the future of warfare no longer belonged to dense, rigid formations, but to maneuver, initiative, and adaptability. It was the beginning of the end for the old Hellenistic world, and the beginning of the Roman Empire.